She ran barefoot through the desert in a wedding dress, beaten, hunted, and left for dead. What she found wasn't just shelter, it was a man who had lost everything, and together they carved a new kind of justice in the blood-red dirt of the Wild West. But when her past came roaring back with a rifle and a claim of ownership, what happened next would shake the entire canyon. Stay with us because this is a story you will never forget. It began with a silhouette against the burning canvas of Zion Canyon, where red cliffs touched the heavens and the air cracked with silence so deep it could shatter a man's thoughts. Silas McCrae, weathered by age and loneliness, knew every inch of this land. For 20 years he'd ridden its trail, slept under its stars, and buried more hope than he cared to admit beneath its dust. Zion didn't give second chances. It didn't offer mercy. It simply endured and expected the same. That afternoon the sun sat heavy over the horizon like a hammer waiting to fall. Silas was tightening the fence near the southern pasture when something pale and fluttering caught his eye out past the bluff near the dry riverbed. At first, he thought it was a trick of the heat, maybe a lost scrap of fabric tangled in the brush. But then it moved, staggered, fell. He dropped his tools without thinking. Zion wasn't kind to strays, especially not ones barefoot and clad in what looked like a wedding dress. By the time he reached her, she was on her knees, swaying like a candle's last flame. Her dress, once white and fine, was ripped and soiled, clinging to her like a ghost's shroud. Her veil hung in tatters across her shoulders, hair matted with sweat and blood. She tried to stand when she saw him try to run, but her legs gave out with a sickening thud. Silas knelt beside her. "Easy now," he murmured. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." Her eyes snapped open, gray, haunted wide with a terror that went far beyond fear of the unknown. "Please," she whispered, voice dry as gravel. "Don't let him find me. I can't go back." Then he saw them, the marks, thin, vicious lines crisscrossing her back, peeking through the torn satin. Some fresh and bleeding. Others, older, scabbed, testament to repeated cruelty. Silas drew in a breath, held it, and then gently took off his duster coat. She flinched when he moved. "Not gonna touch what ain't mine," he said, voice low but firm. "But you're freezing in this heat. That tells me something's broken deep." He draped the coat over her shoulders. She let him. He poured water from his canteen and she drank like she hadn't tasted rain in years. Her hands shook so hard she dropped it twice. Silas said nothing. He just waited. That was his way. Minutes passed before she met his eyes again. "Where am I, Zion?" he said. "About a half-day west of Kanab. My ranch is a mile yonder. Can you ride?" She nodded barely. He helped her to his horse, lifting her as gently as he would a wounded fawn. As they rode back, she leaned into him. Not out of trust, but out of sheer exhaustion. He could feel her bones trembling. The cabin was a modest thing, logs darkened by years of sun, a porch shaded by a cottonwood tree that somehow still stood after decades of drought. He carried her inside, laid her gently on the cot by the hearth, and left the door open so the wind could pass through. The scent of juniper drifted in, mingling with the dust and quiet. That night she didn't speak again. She slept in fits, haunted by dreams that made her whimper and thrash. Silas sat nearby, sharpening a blade he didn't need to sharpen. Listening. Thinking. Once or twice she cried out, but not for help. It was the cry of someone still trapped inside her own mind. Come morning, he found her curled in the corner of the cot, clutching the blanket like it might save her from drowning. Her voice when it came was more breath than sound. "Did I die?" "No," he said softly. "But I reckon something inside you did." She stared at the ceiling. "I don't remember what kindness feels like." "Well," Silas replied, standing, "you've got time now to learn." He didn't ask her name. Names had power, and whatever she was running from had taken too much already. He knew the desert had a way of stripping a person bare, but it could also teach them who they really were. He set about his chores, checking the livestock, fixing a busted latch on the chicken coop, but his thoughts never drifted far from the stranger now sleeping under his roof. He'd taken in hurt animals before, even helped a wounded drifter or two, but never something like this. Never someone who looked at the world like it might strike her dead just for breathing. Later that day, as he gathered firewood, he found her by the window staring out at the canyon, the coat still wrapped around her like armor. Her posture was stiff alert, like a deer that hadn't yet decided whether to run. "You got a name?" he asked casually, not turning from the firewood. She hesitated, then whispered Clara. He nodded, didn't smile. Just said, "Well, Clara, you're safe here." She looked back out the window. "Not for long," she said. And Silas knew then what he'd taken in wasn't just a stranger. He'd taken in a storm that had already started to change the air in his cabin in his heart, and maybe even in the canyon itself. He stood on the porch that evening looking out at the path she'd stumbled down just yesterday. Something about it felt different now, less like a trail, and more like a line drawn in the sand. Trouble wasn't far behind her, he could feel it, and he wasn't sure yet whether he was ready to face it. But when he looked back and saw Clara asleep beneath his coat, her face finally soft with something close to peace, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn her away. Not now, not ever. Clara didn't speak for 2 days, not a word. She would stir when Silas entered the room, eyes darting with the wariness of a hunted creature, but she said nothing. He didn't press. He just kept the fire going, made her broth from the stores he had left, and left a cup of water beside her cot each morning. He remembered the way her body had trembled against him when he helped her off the horse like a string stretched too tight about to snap. That kind of fear wasn't born overnight. It had to be earned through cruelty. On the third morning, when dawn barely blushed, the canyon walls and the shadows of night still clung to the edges of the room, her voice came. Fragile, like wind through dry grass. "I was promised a future," she said. Silas was at the stove stirring coffee. He didn't turn around. He'd learned in life that sometimes the only way to get truth from someone was to let them bleed it out on their own time. So he let her speak. "They sent me west," she continued. "From Boston. Said I'd marry a man with land, that he was kind, that I'd have a home." She swallowed hard, voice cracking. He met me with papers and a grin too wide for his face. Roy Beckett. Big man in Kanab. Said the wedding would be in 2 days, but that we'd be living as man and wife from the moment I stepped off the stagecoach. Silas remained quiet, the only sound the gentle clink of the spoon against the pot. Clara stared at the ceiling. Her hands gripped the blanket like it might keep her from being swept back into the nightmare. The first night, he locked the doors, took the key, looked me over like livestock. Then he didn't wait for the wedding. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. He said I belonged to him. Said I'd learn respect. Her voice fell to a whisper. He beat me. Used a whip. Not just to punish, to mark me, to show me. The coffee boiled over. Silas moved quickly, lifting the pot from the flame, but his hands trembled. He didn't speak, didn't trust himself to. Clara sat up slowly, wincing. I tried to fight. He called it defiance. Brought his ranch hand, big man, cruel eyes. Held me down while Roy taught me obedience. She reached a trembling hand to her back fingers, grazing the still tender welts beneath the shirt he'd lent her. I ran during the wedding. Guests were drunk. He'd put me in that dress-white lace heavy like chains. I slipped out while they laughed and drank. Didn't even take shoes. Just ran. Silas turned finally. His eyes weren't soft. They were steel, hammered in the heat of righteous anger. "I believe you," he said. Clara's lip quivered. "That man, he's not going to let me go. Not without a fight." Silas walked to the mantel, took down a small tin and brought it to her. Inside was salve, healing herbs mixed in old ways. He didn't say anything fancy, just offered it. "For your back," he said gruffly. Clara looked at him, stunned by the offer. "I'll manage," she said, but her voice held no certainty. Silas didn't argue. He placed it on the nightstand and turned away. That evening, Clara sat outside for the first time. She watched the sky blaze with orange and purple fire as the sun dipped behind the cliffs. Her fingers toyed with the cuff of her sleeve and she shivered though the air was warm. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Silas leaned against the post, chewing a sprig of sage. "I've seen folks broken," before he said, "but never seen someone drag themselves out of hell in a wedding dress. Seemed to me you'd earned a place to rest." She gave a weak smile. It didn't reach her eyes, but it was a start. Her shoulders lowered just a bit, enough to notice. Later, she let him apply the salve. She sat on the stool by the fire shirt, pulled loose back exposed. Silas worked in silence, hands steady. He didn't look at the wounds as something grotesque, just signs of what had been done and what needed healing. When he was done, she pulled the shirt back on and stared into the fire. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. "Then it's time to find out," he replied. His tone wasn't soft, but it wasn't hard either. It was honest. She glanced over her shoulder. "What if Roy comes?" Silas picked up his rifle, checked the chamber. "Then he'll find a different kind of welcome." She looked down, the flicker of the fire casting shadows across her face. Her fingers traced the edge of the tin he'd given her earlier. "I thought I'd never see kindness again," she said. "Well," he answered, sitting across from her, "kindness can be quiet. Doesn't mean it's gone." The wind picked up that night, carrying whispers through the canyon. Clara lay in the cot, eyes wide open, the soft glow of the hearth painting shadows across the room. She wasn't ready to sleep. Not yet. But for the first time in days, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes. Silas, from his chair by the window, didn't close his either. He kept his rifle nearby, one eye on the horizon, just in case. Outside, the moon rose high silver and watching. Inside, two strangers listened to the silence, and in that stillness, something almost like hope began to take root. Neither spoke it aloud, but both of them knew the real fight hadn't even started yet, and it was only a matter of time before hell rode back into their quiet corner of the canyon. The days that followed weren't marked by miracles nor grand confessions of love. They were stitched together by the quiet, deliberate actions of two people who had learned that words could be dangerous things. Clara awoke each morning to the smell of wood smoke and coffee, not screams or locked doors. That alone was enough to shake her. The third morning, she found a fresh basin of water and a folded shirt placed neatly at the end of her cot, one of Silas's oversized flannel worn soft by years of labor. She held it to her chest for a moment before slipping it over her frame. It hung loose, but it brought a strange comfort like armor that whispered instead of threatened. She began moving about the cabin, more, sweeping the dust from the corners, scrubbing the pots until her fingers ached. Not because anyone told her to, but because doing something made the silence bearable. Silas never said much, only gave her nods of quiet approval, or left little signs: a peeled apple, a folded blanket, a hammer laid beside a broken step. Clara watched him one evening as he mended a harness by the fire. His hands, thick and calloused, worked the leather with reverence. There was patience in those hands, the kind that came only from pain well survived. It made her wonder what he'd lost, what part of his heart had been buried beneath the very soil she now walked on. One afternoon, while tending to the coop, Clara heard a strange sound near the edge of the garden. She followed it, cautiously, heart hammering, and found a pup, half-starved, one leg injured, cowering beneath the shade of an old tree. He bared tiny teeth at her, but his body shook with fear. She knelt slowly, whispering to it like she might a child, and coaxed it into her lap. When she brought it back to the cabin, Silas arched a brow but said nothing. He simply fetched a rag and a bowl of water. They cleaned its wounds together. For the first time, their hands met. Just a brush. But Clara felt it. A spark not of romance but recognition. Two creatures carrying old scars, daring to hope they might still be seen. She named the pup Ash. Silas never asked why. Nights remained difficult. Shadows whispered too much, but she began sleeping with the pup curled beside her, and sometimes Silas would light the fire twice during the night, though he never said whether it was for warmth or comfort. Clara suspected it was both. One night, a thunderstorm rolled through the canyon. Clara startled awake, breath short, trembling. The crash of thunder reminded her too much of boots on wood floors, of slammed doors of pain. She sat up, eyes wild. A soft knock at her door. Silas didn't enter, just stood in the hall. "You all right?" She couldn't answer, not right away, but the sound of his voice steadied her. "I'm trying," she said finally. "You don't have to be alone with it," he replied. Then he turned and left. She didn't sleep again that night, but she didn't cry either. As the days warmed, she ventured farther, helping gather firewood, feeding the horses, even learning to stitch tack. Silas showed her how to saddle a mare, how to check hooves. His lessons were short, quiet, patient. He treated her not like porcelain or a project, but like someone capable. Their meals were simple: beans, biscuits, coffee boiled thick and bitter. But Clara found comfort in their rhythm. She began humming softly as she worked songs from her childhood that once filled parlors and now filled the empty spaces of the ranch. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset bleed across the sky, Clara said, "You don't ask many questions." Silas didn't look at her, figured you've had enough of men who want answers before offering peace. That made her smile. Truly smile. She turned to him. "Why did you stay here alone all this time?" He hesitated, then said, "Lost my wife. Long ago, I came here to forget. Ended up remembering everything instead." She didn't press, but her heart softened. A few days later, Clara was in the barn brushing one of the horses when Silas entered carrying an old guitar. He placed it beside her without a word. Dust covered its strings. She picked it up that evening and played a few hesitant notes by the fire. The sound was rough but sweet. Silas didn't comment, but she caught the corner of his mouth twitch. Ash, now walking without a limp, curled between them on the rug. As she strummed, Clara felt something she hadn't in a long time, a pulse of life, not bound by fear. The nights grew longer, the air warmer, and with each shared task and unspoken word, something bloomed between them. Not passion, not yet, but something more enduring. Trust like the roots of a tree. Then came a night when she passed by his door and heard a cry. Not loud, but guttural, pained. She opened the door quietly. Silas was thrashing, caught in a dream. She stood frozen until he jerked awake, gasping. Their eyes met. For the first time, he looked as broken as she'd once felt. She stepped into the room, knelt beside him, and placed a hand on his arm. "You're not alone with it either," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. The bond they shared wasn't forged in declarations. It was shaped in silence, in nights endured, in wounds seen, but not pitied in mornings where a cup of coffee said everything that needed saying. The world outside might still be wild and cruel, But here in this quiet corner of the canyon, something was changing. Two souls, both battered by storms, were beginning to shelter one another, and though neither dared speak the word, love, slow, cautious enduring, had begun to take root in the stillness between them. It began with the sound of hooves, not one or two, but many, the kind that stir the earth before they are seen. Clara heard them first, her hands frozen over the dishwater, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Silas heard them too. He rose from his place by the hearth, the worn brush still in hand, his eyes narrowing as the echo came nearer. They had known this moment would come. That peace, however tender and new, was a fragile guest in a land like this. No one lived in Zion Canyon for long without making peace with the idea that something or someone would come one day to test whatever joy they'd found. Clara set the plate down, slowly dried her hands, and stepped out onto the porch. Silas was already there, rifle resting lightly in the crook of his arm. The dust cloud came first rising up the trail like a warning bell. Then came the sound of the carriage, its wheels groaning under weight and authority. Men on horseback flanked it like vultures, circling something they hadn't yet decided to kill. And in the center of it all, tall and grim, was Roy Beckett. He hadn't changed. Still dressed like he owned every mile between Kanab and the sky itself. His coat was freshly pressed, his boots polished, and yet there was something ragged about him too, a desperation behind the smugness, as if Clara's defiance had wounded more than just his pride. When he stepped down from the wagon, he didn't bother greeting anyone. He scanned the homestead with narrowed eyes. Benton Yates stood just behind him, still built like a mountain with less kindness. The other riders were young hired guns, perhaps faces set hard, but not cruel. They hadn't seen what Clara had. Not yet. "You got something of mine," McCrae Roy called out. His voice was calm but cold. "She's not a thing," Silas said, quiet but firm, "and she's not yours." Roy's gaze flicked to Clara, who stood straight beside the porch post, Ash the pup at her heel. "Clara," he said, almost gently, "you don't want this. You don't want blood on your hands. Come back with me. Be reasonable." "I've already been reasonable," Clara replied, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. "You taught me what that costs. I'm not your property." "You signed papers," Roy snapped. "You swore vows. You broke every one of them before they ever left my lips," she cut in. "I was a mail-order bride, not a prisoner. You turned me into something else." Roy's jaw clenched. "The law says you're mine. And the law," Silas said, stepping forward now, "don't always say what's right." Benton shifted fingers twitching near his belt. The other men watched uncertain. Silas raised his rifle slowly, not aiming it, yet just showing it. "You fire a shot here, Benton, you'll start a war you won't finish." The silence stretched. A hawk cried overhead. The wind kicked up dust and memory alike. Then Clara moved. Her feet carried her down the steps before her mind had finished deciding. She walked toward Roy's shotgun, resting on her shoulder. 10 steps. 15. Then she stopped. The gap between them hummed with history. "You beat me," she said. "You tied me down, had me whipped like livestock. And now you want to talk. Reason." Roy laughed, a short, humorless bark. "You think a girl like you can run forever. Think this old man can keep you safe." Clara tightened her grip on the shotgun. "I didn't come here to be kept. I came here to live." Roy turned his face, darkening. "Take her," he told Benton. Benton stepped forward. Ash growled low, but Clara was faster. She brought the shotgun down and aimed, straight at Roy. Her arms shook, but she didn't lower them. "You take one more step, Benton," she warned, "and your boss won't leave here standing." The men behind Roy froze. Silas raised his rifle too, this time squarely at Benton. "You'd better be sure," Silas said softly. "'Cause I am." The air held its breath. The canyon watched. Benton looked between Clara and Silas, then at Roy. "She ain't worth it?" he muttered, backing away. Roy's eyes went wide. "You coward." Benton said nothing. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode off. One by one, the others followed. Roy was alone, his face flushed with fury. "This isn't over." "No," Clara said. "It's just beginning." Roy glared at them, turned, and climbed back into his carriage. The wheels groaned as it turned away. Dust swallowed him whole. Clara lowered the shotgun. Silas walked up and gently took it from her. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading. He set the gun aside and wrapped his arms around her. It was the first time they'd embraced. She didn't cry. She just leaned into him and let the quiet hold her. That evening they sat on the porch again, 2 cups of coffee between them. Ash at their feet, the sky burned orange. No one spoke for a while. When Clara finally did, her voice was soft. "He'll come back. Or send someone." Silas nodded. "Let him. We'll be ready." And they would, because the reckoning hadn't broken them. It had forged something stronger. Not just love, but resolve. And the canyon, ancient and unmoved, bore witness to their stand. They didn't speak much the morning after. Words felt too small for what had passed. Clara rose early, brewed coffee, and stood by the window watching the sunlight spill across the dry earth like a promise. The dust had settled, but the memory of confrontation hung in the air like gun smoke. Ash, ever loyal, rested at her feet, ears twitching at every breeze. The world hadn't changed, but she had. And so had Silas. He emerged from the barn with quiet purpose, as if nothing had happened, but Clara saw it in the way he lingered by the doorway watching her. A look of wonder, perhaps, or relief, or maybe something gentler like the recognition of a soul that had stopped running. For the first time since she arrived, she smiled first. That afternoon, Silas cleared a patch of ground behind the cabin. "Spring's coming," he said, and though it sounded like a remark about the weather, it meant more. Clara knew it. They planted together tomatoes, beans, squash. Silas showed her how to test the soil, how to lay rows by feel and habit. Clara's hands were clumsy at first, more used to mending than digging. But she learned. She wanted to. Her fingernails filled with dirt, and her laughter began to sound less like defiance and more like peace. At night, they sat by the fire, the air sweet with the scent of earth and pine. Clara began to write. She had no ink, just charcoal and scraps of paper. She wrote letters not to be sent, but to be said. To her younger self. To the girl who had once waited on a train platform in Boston, holding a bag of dreams that would be stolen before sundown. Silas never asked what she wrote. He just made sure the fire stayed lit long enough for her to finish. One morning, she found him carving wood outside the barn. It was a simple sign etched with careful hands, Langdon McCrae Ranch. He didn't show it to her, just leaned it against the fence. She stood beside it, fingers tracing the letters. "You sure?" she asked. He looked at her eyes, steady. "Been sure since the moment you pointed that shotgun." Weeks passed. The garden sprouted green against the red of Zion. Clara painted the porch railings white. She taught Ash tricks, though the pup mostly just pretended to listen. Silas built a bench under the cottonwood where they took coffee in the mornings, watching the canyon breathe. The townspeople heard whispers. Some came to see for themselves. Women, mostly. They brought bread stories, cautious smiles. Clara listened. She didn't tell her story right away, but they saw it in her eyes, in her strength. One woman younger than Clara took her hand and asked, "Is it true you stood him down?" Clara nodded, with both hands shaking. They laughed together, but tears were there too. silent, shared. Something passed between them that words could never hold. In their stories, Clara saw echoes of herself, and they saw in her what they'd feared they'd lost the ability to begin again. Silas took in 2 boys from the town's edge orphaned after a fever swept through their camp. He taught them to ride to mend tack to chop wood without wasting energy. Clara watched the way he moved with them, patient, firm, but always fair. They listened to him the way Ash listened to Clara, alert, loyal, not because they feared him, but because they trusted him. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It had become something living, a sanctuary, a home, not built from perfect people but from the broken who chose to heal. There were still quiet nights haunted by old dreams, but they came less frequently now. And when they did, there was someone to reach for in the dark. One night, Clara sat alone by the garden. The moon was high, the plants swaying like dancers. She held something in her hand, Roy's ring. She had kept it not for sentiment, but as proof, a relic of survival. That night she dropped it into the embers of the fire, watched it glow, melt, vanish. When Silas joined her, she leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Done?" he asked. "Almost," she said. "One more thing." She rose, walked to the edge of the garden, and planted one last seed. "What's that A flower?" she said, "for memory." He didn't question it, just watched as she patted the soil, her hands steady her back, unbowed. He knew that gesture meant more than anything she could have said. That night, after the fire burned low, they lay together beneath a blanket. Ash curled at their feet. The wind whispered through the trees, no longer sounding like warning, but like song. Clara rested her head on Silas's chest, listening to the beat of a heart that had waited too long to be heard. "I didn't think I could love again," she said. "I didn't think I deserved to," he replied. Silence settled soft and wide, a peace not born of escape, but of defiance, a love that was not claimed but chosen. "But we do," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "we do." Outside, the canyon stood sentinel. It had seen pain, yes, but it had also seen resilience. And now, in the hush of midnight, it bore witness to something rare. Not a happy ending, but a true one. And sometimes in a land as wild as this, that was even better. Clara Langdon's journey began with desperation, and ended with something far more powerful, dignity. What unfolded between the red canyon walls of Zion was not merely a story of escape, nor even one of survival, but a profound testament to the human spirit's capacity to heal, to trust again, and ultimately to love. She had arrived with nothing, no shoes, no voice, no sense of safety. Her back bore the marks of cruelty, her mind the scars of betrayal. And yet, with each passing day at the ranch, she reclaimed pieces of herself. The girl who had been sold into submission became the woman who stood firm in defiance. The bride who had been beaten became the guardian of her own soul. And in a place where the land was harsh and the law harsher, she chose to fight not with vengeance, but with truth. Silas McCrae, too, was changed. A man once buried in silence and solitude, he had learned again how to care. He didn't rescue Clara. He welcomed her, respected her space, and allowed her the room to grow. In doing so, he found something in himself he thought long dead: purpose. Their bond was never hurried. It was born in glances in small, shared tasks, in the sound of coffee brewing at dawn and wood being chopped at dusk. It was a slow, careful unfolding, like spring pushing through winter. Together, they carved a life that was not perfect, but honest. The garden they grew behind their cabin was more than a patch of green. It was a symbol of hope, of something tended and nourished after seasons of drought. Each seed planted was an act of courage. Each shoot a declaration that they were still here, still trying, still worthy. The townsfolk saw it. Women came with stories of their own, quietly whispered like prayers. They saw in Clara not a victim, but a survivor. Not a cautionary tale, but a beacon. And in return, Clara gave them something they hadn't known they were missing. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they could choose again. That the past didn't have to dictate the future. The orphaned boys Silas brought into their care learned more than how to ride or mend leather. They learned decency. That strength wasn't about control, but about honor. That a real man didn't raise a hand to dominate but to protect. The cabin itself became something sacred, a place stitched together with quiet acts of love. A home where laughter eventually returned, where meals were shared without fear, where nightmares were met with a steady hand and a listening ear. It wasn't paradise, but it was real. And in the Wild West, that was something rare. When Clara burned Roy's ring, she didn't just destroy a symbol of pain, she released herself from the last tether to a life she never chose. And when she planted that final seed, she wasn't burying her past. She was growing something new from its ashes. A memory, yes, but also a monument to resilience. The true heart of their story isn't in the gunfight or the escape. It's in the quiet redemption, in the way Silas made space for her voice, in the way Clara reached back and helped others find their own. It's in the understanding that healing is a slow, sacred process, not a destination. And that love, real love, isn't about rescuing someone. It's about walking beside them no matter how broken the road. From their story, we learn something timeless, that pain doesn't make us unlovable, that scars don't make us weak, that even in a world built to break spirits, the simple act of kindness, of choosing to stay, to plant, to listen, can be revolutionary. Clara and Silas didn't set out to change the world, but they changed each other's. And that was enough. In today's world, their lesson feels more relevant than ever. We rush, we demand perfection. We bury our pain or broadcast it, but rarely do we sit with it. Rarely do we allow ourselves the grace to grow slowly, to heal with patience. Clara's journey reminds us that sometimes healing means showing up every day, even when it hurts, even when you're scared. And Silas's reminds us that offering a quiet space, a steady presence, and a listening heart can be the difference between someone surviving and someone truly living. So, let this story sit with you a while. Let it remind you that every act of compassion, every seed of trust, planted every moment of gentleness matters, and that even if you've been broken, you can still grow. If Clara and Silas's journey touched you, if their strength stirred something in your soul, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this, tales of courage, humanity, and the quiet revolutions happening all around us. Share this story, leave a comment, and join our community. Because here at Wild West Stories, we believe that every scar tells a story worth hearing, and every heart, no matter how bruised, deserves a chance to be whole again.